I do have a few questions, but I was just wondering if you have something to discuss or something particular with the exhibition than just...
Sure. I mean, maybe the best thing to sort of establish is that my work is kind of different installations which usually have themes that repeat. So even if I'm working on very large scale in public space, or if I'm working on a smaller scale, there are underlying themes that I'm interested in addressing, but not in a systematic or programmatic or analytical way. There's much more out of intuition and improvisation. But what I've been doing with recorders, now with trackers, and in the future with 2 more shows that I'm preparing, one is called Performers, one is called Generators, is making a really kind of artificial categorization of the pieces, so that when the public goes in, they actually have very different experiences, but they're underlining one particular thing. So for instance, in recorders, it was really about the archive, about the archival image, about how the content is entirely crowdsourced, entirely produced by the public. In trackers, the main idea is the idea of live, of something that is happening at that very minute. There's no, these pieces, well, sometimes they have an archive, but most of the time what you're seeing is a performance. And that performance is taking place in front of the work.
Right at the moment.
Right at the, exactly.
I mean, the performer is the spectator.
The spectator,
yeah,
exactly,
definitely.
exactly. Whereas, for instance, in performers, that's a category which will be artworks that are made, many of them are interactive, but they're made for trained composers, musicians, actors. So it happens that I am not the content, but the content is someone who is trained in their métier. So the only one I've done so far in that is one performance I did 2 years ago at the Guggenheim with Isabella Rossellini. I'm hoping to work with Kronos Quartet to do this one piece for them, and so on. So there will be this body of pieces that are about those performances, and then it'll be represented. And
so how do you choose the work of art of trackers?
So trackers have to have, the most important thing about trackers is that the artwork needs to be incomplete. So the artwork has a very simple inversion, which is throughout all of our education we are told to go to a museum to be inspired by the work of art, and this is the little reversal is that is the artwork now that is listening to you and seeing you and sensing you, and it is only when this happens that they perform for you, and they perform something in relation to your input. So the idea that these artworks are sentient, or that they're aware of their surroundings, is really fundamental. And what that does is it asks us questions that have already been asked. Nothing of what I do is new. This is very important too, because I don't like the word new media, right? I have a big problem with that. But these are investigations that, for example, the minimalists did very well. At what point does your work of art, which is, I don't know, a cube made out of mirrors, not so much about that object, but about the people looking at this object and how the people are also part of that artistic experience. Or with land art, how that, that stage of a landscape, for instance, forms part of the work. Or in pop, how the media itself is a stage, so on. So these are investigations that have already been done. With trackers, the only emphasis is on really thinking about what art should be like in a society that is a reality TV, technological culture, surveillance is ubiquitous, privacy is inexistent. So instead of just complaining about the loss of privacy or warning people about the future Orwellian society, I take a very sort of St. Augustine position where the apocalypse has already happened. It's done. It's everywhere. Even if you don't have a computer, even if you've never made a phone call and you live in a remote region of some indigenous population, you're still part of a technological culture, because your language is about to disappear because of mainstream globalization, because your ecology is being wiped out by transnational capitalism, because your country's economic profile is all based on virtual capital that doesn't exist. So even if you don't use technology, you're still part of a statistic. And so my position has always been, with respect to technologies, is this is inevitable. It's there, it's part of our language, so I work with them because of that. Specifically with tracking, I'm very interested in the work of Julia Scher or Dynagram or Bruce Nauman or Namjoon Paik. There's so many artists who have worked with surveillance equipment. But there is a very big and important change, and that change is that they were working with closed circuit TV. They were working with a type of surveillance where there's always the idea of a person monitoring the apparatus. And so they did very well with that. And in my opinion, there's very little to add to that discourse.
But yours is much more interactive, and I feel there is kind of reversal, meaning that the work of art does exist through the public, but there is a kind of reverse thing, that something like the public exists through the work of art.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if I'm making it
clear.
No.
Yeah.
And it's quite specific to you. I don't know. There's something.
There's other artists who are working with this. There's David Rokeby, the Bureau of Inverse Technology, the Institute of Applied Autonomy. There's quite a few artists who are basically mapping the way in which now cameras and surveillance equipment has reached a level of autonomy. And that's the part that we as artists need to pervert. How do we criticize a system where there is no viewer? The camera itself has prejudices that are built inside of it. So cameras today try to detect your ethnic origin. They try to compare you with a database of suspicious individuals, that kind of thing. So given that this exists, given that our political climate is so completely absurd that it thinks that the solution to problems like terrorism is technology, which is ridiculous. I mean, nobody believes this. Nobody in the right mind thinks that terrorism will stop because you've put cameras. They think that's how it should be. But given that that's the case, then how can we take these technologies, for example, face recognition, technologies of infrared scanning, technologies that look for pattern recognition. I was learning in French, it's called reconnaissance de forme. Okay, so there's these cameras that actually look for particular shapes or particular, and then they learn from this. So all of this to say that the camera itself has built in all of its prejudices, its choices. And as an artist, what I'm interested in doing is, okay, well, let's create environments that are poetic or critical or disruptive of that reality. So there's an author, Manuel de Landa, who talks, this is in a very early book in 1991 called War in the Age of Intelligent Machines. And this is a book that talks about how the executive control of remote control ballistics and cameras and drone planes and everything is now being given to computers. So that change is what I'm hoping to have a contribution to. The trackers that we make today come from Patriot Act and from Homeland Security, not from sort of the technologies of the 60s and 70s.
And this explains also the choice of the title of the exhibition. I mean, trackers, this is at the same time the devices, the technological devices that you use to make the pieces, but it is also what it's done to the public. There are they are being tracked down by. So how, I mean, that was the choice for the title of the exhibition.
Yeah.
Because you told me that Trackers was more about performance by the public, but you've got this other exhibition called Performer. But so
yeah, no, it's very important. You're right. Trackers. I'm trying to speak about. Of course, I should just mention, my titles are never prescriptive. Like, I never try to pretend that they have like a very specific architecture. But when you look at all of them, recorders really refers to the experiences. So it's the machines or the actual devices. Trackers also, the actual devices. But of course, I love it if we can turn around and say, well, who are the trackers? You know, the people are trackers. And certainly when you go into a museum, there is a sense of you tracking an artwork. There is a sense of, for instance, the way that collections are presented. It's all about this exhaustive representation of historical moments, right? Like, I mean, if you think about Paris, you know, and you go to the Musée d'Orsay, you know, there's a really funny problem in Madrid, for instance, where Prado Museum and Reina Sofia don't accept when one begins and one ends, and there's a big debate about this. So it's all about tracking, you know, sort of publics and historical tendencies and so on and so forth. But the idea of the public being the one that tracks is interesting, because museums already are not neutral. A museum today is all about metrics. A curator, a museum director, a sponsor, all they care about is how many people came through the door, what was the actual gift shop, benefits. I mean, this is how they do their statistical analysis. So the idea of this public being observed is already a part of museum usual day-to-day practice. So all we're doing here is saying, okay, well, let's use those very same tools, but create something that produces nightmares or produces, makes us irritated, or makes us have a chance to talk to somebody we never would talk to anyway. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you, because I was watching through all the pieces that are going to be in Paris, and some really strike me the way that, as you said, the public perform, and I was wondering if you were, when creating the work, thinking about choreography or the way that people are going to respond to the piece with their body. I mean, obviously, yes, as you're speaking about performance.
Yeah. But at the same time,
there is a kind of interaction, but physically, I mean, and visually between the body of the public and the work of art.
Yeah. And in that sense, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is empirical. Like, a lot of what I'm doing is, I imagine people may behave in a certain way or another. And depending on the architecture of the show and how you place your works, you may invite people to do something or not. But the truth is that one of the exciting things about working with open systems is that you can't predict what and how people will react. So an example that I give often is I do a lot of shadow works, big shadow works. And very, very first time that I did a big shadow work, I had this huge shadow that would representing the fear of invasion and whatever. It was in Austria, and in the end, it was just fun. It was just playful. People were crushing each other. No one was thinking about fear. More now expressionistic shadow, otherness. I mean, I had all these ideas about how people would play, and the reality, it was completely different. But that was great. I love it when what people end up doing in a work varies, substantially from what I thought would happen. The interesting thing too for working with this kind of project is, how do you create more I hate to use the word social because I'm Latin American, so I'm forbidden to use the word social, more connective experience. So I'm very interested in groups of people. So not interactivity with your helmet or your keyboard, you know. This kind of interaction with a joystick is very much centered on this kind of closed loop, individualistic, hermetic, Ouroboros, you know, like you can't be connective. Most of my platforms are much more like choreography. They're more open to the sides. But I don't know in English, in French, if performance has the same connotation in English. It's not. Performance just means it's live. There are no roles that are pre-established. There's no script, or if there is a script, you're not representing yourself as something other than yourself. So in that sense, performance specifically prevents from you to pre-program what the outcome is. Yeah. Compared to say theater or compared to composition.
Yeah, no, I was not thinking about theater when saying performance. No.
But so in France, what is like Marina Abramovic? What does she do?
Performance. Okay. But we do have those kind of problem as well as in English with performance, because you can use performance for dance, for artistic visual act, and then in theater can be a performance. This kind of blurring thing, but this is quite interesting, the fact that people are acting with the work of art, but with the other people around them. This is and this is what the space of the museum can is quite how to say that, adequate to those. But this is really, I mean, how do you deal with this difference between those kind of exhibition and those kind of work in a museum space compared to what you do in the kind of outdoor and architectural? I mean, this is it seems to me so different. I mean, on the scale and on the relation to. Is there, for example, at Paris, is there a real relation to the architectural space or not? This is quite specific to the public and to the piece of art, but the architectural space is not.
I think successful museums, especially contemporary art museums, are trying their very best to gain the kind of direct, immediate reaction that you get in public space. Like they all seek, just like you have the dematerialization of objects in art, you get the museums are trying to allow a ever larger sort of sampling of what creativity is. So the interesting museums are very performative. They're not just bringing performance artists, but performing their collection in an interesting way and having weird kind of hybrid public, private kind of experiences and spaces. I would say that the main difference is architectural. So in a museum, as you're right to say, there are these constraints. There are existing constraints that are often quite conservative because they're about the presentation of linear, sort of.
I hope Gaîté Lyrique will be quite different.
Exactly. So Gaîté Lyrique is quite different because it's born out of this idea of performance. So then in that sense it's perfect. There's other places, like I'm thinking about the Barbican in London, which is also a mixture of music and visual arts. And so I think more and more in the future art centers will go toward this model, because there is this idea that music and the visual and dance and all this, they're separate. It's a very modernist idea. It's a modern idea of separation, like universities, all the faculties are separated. But the future, of course, it's a mixture. So museums...
The museum have to adapt to the evolution of the arts.
Exactly.
So, I mean, what you do and other artists do to mix all these things, I mean,
and you see it not just in technology. You see it, for example, the enormous success that Christian Markley has had now in contemporary art is fascinating, because here is somebody who's always worked with so thoroughly with notions of sound and of sound environment and production that you realize, okay, that boundary is gone. Or Karsten Haller puts like a big slide in Tate Modern, and it's the boundary between the museum and the theme park is also going away. So I sometimes say that, you know, if we accept that the museum is the new theme park, I don't have a problem with that. But what is important is to think, well, what is the theme? Yeah. You know, what is the underlying reason why we're doing this? So I feel like pieces outdoors, they're always going to give you a much more spontaneous, improvised, politically charged, diverse public. Why? Well, because obviously this is a location that is not neutral, but that is a platform for people to self-represent. The moment that you're in the museum, you have to deal with a whole bunch of other factors. And one of the factors you have to deal with is this idea of observation. The observation that you do and the observation that is done on you. So in that sense, I specifically love all works of art, all paintings, for instance, that the subjects are looking at you, right? So, you know, so you have Parmigianino, you have Velázquez, Las Meninas, you have any kind of, you know, El Greco, they're always like just checking you out, and there's this eye contact that I think is really, really strong to involve you in the action, right? And some artists like Leon Golub has done this beautiful sets of paintings in the first Gulf War where they're basically torturing this guy, and the torturers are looking at you, and you're kind of like at their height, and you're kind of brought in. So anything that that we can do to question that supposed neutrality that the exhibition space has is always welcome. So I have a position which is, I often say that museums, most museums have a condescending and paternalistic attitude toward the public. As I was saying, it's just metrics and shopping. But I think that when you create platforms for people to self-represent, you're always going to be surprised, because people actually have a lot to say, and more, because we live in a society of our own cameras are indoors, reality TV, Google, you know, Street View. Yeah. So we are now accepting that society of spectacle, and YouTube proves that some of the most interesting art is not in museums. You know, people are very spontaneously coming up with this stuff. Now, is there a lot of crap? Yeah, there is. There's a lot of crap. And does everything go? No, everything does not go. I think that the job of the artist today is to present a platform that is interesting, that is engaging, that will put out certain questions, and then based on those limitations, people will be able to participate or to you know, reject or resist or laugh or whatever it is that they're going to do.
I've read a few articles about your work, and there was one talking about the hybridity. Mm-hmm. How would say that concept, which is really, you know, something that you cross for many artists. And I was thinking about this, what we used to say about hybridity, or the biological context. And I was thinking if it was, would you agree with this concept in relation to your technological use of and creation of the work?
Yeah, hybridity used to...
You know, it's really kind of, I would say, not paradoxal, but there is so much beyond this concept. So I was wondering, how do you relate to that?
Well, hybridity is
and there is a kind of negativity in that, you know.
Especially in the past, because in the past there was...
Historically speaking, it's kind of quite... even dangerous.
But I mean, if you think about, like, if we start with me, right? I'm I got 3 passports. You're
an hybrid.
I'm a complete hybrid. I have, I don't know how many different ethnic groups in my blood. So from that perspective, hybridity is a very natural kind of state. I think that the really weird thing is the opposite. Purity is like very weird. It's very, unattainable. So I think that I would say pretty much like technology, that hybridity is inevitable. But I would also say that technology itself is I like to say that it's not a tool, that it's a language, that it's something that we cannot separate ourselves from. So when you look at exactly what is it that the digital brings to the visual arts, or to or in general to the majority of people, well, it brings a capability for this hybridity to take place. So it's a place for hybridity. So at one moment my computer is pretending to be a typewriter, at another it's pretending to be a canvas, at another is pretending to be a controller for motors or whatever. So it's the natural. It's just like language. It's all arts require language, because thinking happens through language. And then you could say exactly the same about language. Language itself is a hybrid form. It's a mixture of tropes that then grows over time in a social context, and that is out of the control of individuals. And I like that, because it's humbling. You feel like you're not the Friedrich, sort of seeing the sea under you, but you realize that you yourself are a function of all of these things that you look at and you create. At the same time,
because I was thinking about what you do is that, okay, there's technology, but there is all those different type of how to say that, using video, and at the same time all the computers, devices. There is kind of multiplicity in all those work.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's about what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to elicit relationships. So when you're investigating relationships, you have to use any materials at your disposal to bring them on. Oftentimes I work with experts in their fields, like photographers or linguists or whatever, programmers, and the model is changing, because it really depends on what you're working on. What I can say is that I have never in my life made anything by myself. Even when I'm sitting down on my computer making a design, I'm aware of the fact that the software that I'm using has been written by other people who have already put into the tools their own preferences. So this idea of freedom, often you hear, oh, technology gives you new freedom. No, it doesn't. No, like a canvas gives you infinity of possibilities. So why, if you're attracted by technology because it gives you infinity of possibilities, is because you don't know anything about paint or about writing or about. So yeah, no, I think that it's important to just sort of recognize that that this is already all existing, and that we're making I don't believe in progress, but I do believe in progressions. You're making certain contributions. I think it's really important to know what other people have done. You are, if any time that you're speaking, you are in relationship to those things in the past, and then of course you're in relationship to what you're creating at that moment. What is it that your project is eliciting on people. So I'm interested in that. That's why if you notice every single one of my artworks, when it's documented, there's a person inside of it, or there's a record, or documenting it is important almost anthropologically. Like, what do people do in front of this? Because that's part of the reason why we do it in the first place. We don't know.
It's even more than in front. It's like with.
And also I think that there is that moment the moment where you find out that the camera is yourself, it's a really beautiful moment, because you find that also in so many different artworks that I find useful. But it's the moment that you realize, that is not my statement, but it's an old statement, but that it's not that Big Brother is watching you, is that we are Big Brother watching, and that it is within ourselves that is happening. So there's this moment of schizophrenia, this doubling, which, not that I'm an expert, but I think Lacan talks a lot about, right?
Yeah.
The actual quote from Lacan is something like, "I am I where I am not." So the idea of the recognition of yourself comes at the expense of yourself, and I like that stuff. I mean, I think very, very, very few people will go to Trackers and think about Lacan, but if you do, if one does, it may be interesting to see, well, what is it that their experience is, because I think that when you have done analysis of yourself, these tools are straight out of a very schizophrenic kind of effect. So, I myself, I'm very excited about all of that stuff. I don't know if that's going to come through in the show. We'll see. We'll see. I also think that this sort of sensation of paranoia and predatory vision and the idea of policing, will come through. I think that a lot of people find this stuff playful, and I'm fine with play. It's no problem with play. But I want to be right in the middle. Not in the middle. I want to be both. I want to be seductive with inclusion and integrating the participant through self-representation, through complicity, knowing that you're being seen. At the same time, I want it to be violent. I want it to elicit questions about the degree to which this can happen, the degree to which your identity does double up through these materials. It depends on the piece, but most of them are right in the border between seduction and violence.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Some are definitely kind of playful, and you cannot avoid it. Then you've got some who are much more kind of... it seems like you're kind of politically... maybe not engaged, but there is something like definitely critical. And other are definitely poetic. Just, so simple, and so there is all this.
And I like it when my work is in combination. Like in a solo show, you can't do that, but in recent shows, I've seen my work combine with, artists who are working very engaged with a certain kind of political agency. I love that, because I think that, I do have that drive, that desire to see these works in a context other than new media, in fact, I am, except for La Gaîté, most of my shows now are in contexts where it's outside of the normal media arts, because I come from Ars Electronica, V2, Société des Arts Technologiques. I've done all of those things, and I'm really happy that those platforms were there, because there was a moment where it was really important that everybody who was creating with these tools could, in fact, discuss and have focus groups. But then it comes to a moment where electronic art gets normalized. It's part now of the normal dialogue of culture. So for me, the idea of putting a show together because it happens to be done with computers is of no importance. No importance. What matters is the nightmares, the passions, the hormones, the issues that are being discussed. So I like it when there's that kind of mixture. Yeah.
and there is this really not strange, but really, I mean, it's kind of nightmare for me. Your piece with this projector of light, you know, avoiding people. It's really, I don't know.
And it changes.
Strange feeling. It's
and I'm really curious to do that project because it's very different. Many of my pieces of tour are received very different in different contexts and different cities. In Mexico, that light, as I was writing in one of the texts, is associated with, you know, the American police searching for Mexican immigrants. You know, it's like this policing. But of course, it's also the lights of rock stars, and it's the light of media and whatever. But for me, architecturally, it's interesting because, you know, that light.
This is maybe the one in the show that plays with the architecture, where the other don't so really, but this one,
that one is, it's definitely the architecture of light. That light, if you walk into it, it actually has the capability to sense obstacles. So when it's going away from me, if it sees you there, it goes around you, and that's a very architectural thing. You get this sense of collision. So that project specifically is, as you said, is the most architectural of all of them, and also the architecture is ephemeral. You know, it's resulting in the flows. The exit signs is a little bit like that too, because there's a sense of the permanence of the architectural grid and this culture of safety and safety routes and whatever. So when these things begin to be turbulent and they are rotating, they're always showing you your left. It's also architectural, but not in reference to the building, but the people and their flow.
You're kind of creating an architecture in itself. With the piece.
And you know, and the eye. I mean, a lot of people have done works with the eye. When I first did the eye in '91. It was at a moment where a lot of people were working with these helmets and these keyboards and this whatever to interact. So for me, it was important to bring it back to the body, to our tangible space, as opposed to the space of virtual space. I was not interested in going behind the screen. I was interested in bringing that stuff here, you know, which is when I used that word relational a number of years before, before In the End, Relational Aesthetics by Baudrillard. A few years before him, but now the word is terrible because everybody did that for a while, and now his particular vision has been accepted, but also criticized rightly, because a lot of what Baudrillard was talking about in that particular book had to do with a production. My work is about a presentation, and that's the main difference. The main difference is that I'm interested in making horizontal not the process of production, but in making horizontal the process of perception. I would love to have a discussion with him.
Track him down.
I met him once. He's a nice guy. I wish he was not a nice guy. Then it'd be easier. What do you
then you can discuss.
But he's super nice.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything you want to add about the exhibition?
La Gaîté has the most important architecture. La Gaîté has is its people. There's these incredible technicians. They are unbelievable. I don't tell them because I don't want them to get too excited, but they are number one. You know, and it's very rare to show up in a museum of contemporary art where they have, you know, all the cables you need, and they have the electrical requirements and so on. So in that sense, it's one of the best places I've ever seen. You know, it's a really wonderful infrastructure.
They are welcoming, I think, in a few days or in a few weeks, another artist working here, Herman Colgan.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
So I think they kind of prepare to welcome those type of works.
Yeah.
You definitely have to be aware of what you require for those kind of pieces, you know.
Yeah.
They're not paintings, obviously. So.
Yeah. But at the same time, if you're going to have a visual art section, then you need to make sure that, you know, that the material presentation, like wall building, they can't build the wall. So that's a limitation that we need to deal with, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful space. I think it's going to be good. And I also like the idea that my first show in Paris is going to be in a location where the public is already going to be young, it's already going to be used to this kind of material. I wouldn't see it.
I mean, if you go there, you know what you're
getting into. Yeah. And so I like that. Eventually, I would like to be more experimental. I would love to be able to mix these works with more traditional, you know, sort of formats or more architectural interventions or do something outdoors. But it'll happen.